On that dark, rainy night, I was in the middle of making my deliveries in my delivery van. I had a job to do in a small town which was a bit far from the city. The time was around 11:15 p.m. The rain was coming down pretty hard, and the streets were wet. I usually finished my deliveries way earlier, but today was one of those odd days when some stores needed their goods late at night, usually after 10:30 p.m. These stores were not close to each other. They were scattered all over, so I often found myself on long, dull roads, just listening to the radio and thinking about getting home. As I was driving, I noticed some lights in the distance. I thought it might be another late-night traveler like me. As I got closer, I realized it was an old-fashioned truck, moving really slowly. Maybe they were worried about the slippery roads because of the rain, but it felt like they were going way slower than necessary. I waited for a bit, but then my patience was wearing thin. I wanted to get past them and finish my deliveries. I increased my speed a tad and signaled with my lights, indicating I wanted to overtake them. But just as I was about to pass them, the truck swerved and went off the road, going downhill. Panicking, I hit my brakes hard and pulled over to the side of the road. I stayed put for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. From where I sat, I saw the truck had missed some big trees but looked stuck in the mud. I felt bad. What if they needed help? I tried calling 911 from my phone, but there was no network reception. After waiting for a few minutes and seeing no one come out of the truck, I decided to check on them. I got out, with the rain soaking me immediately, and made my way down to where the truck was. It was hard to see in the dark, but the truck was mostly intact, just trapped in some dense bushes. I walked over to the driver's side. The windows were all foggy and I couldn't see inside. With hesitation, I knocked on the window and then slowly opened the door. Inside, a man was trying to start the truck, looking really worried. "Hey there," I began. "You all right? Do you need any assistance?" He stared at me for a moment, probably processing the situation. Then he simply asked, "Could you give me a lift?" I replied, "Sure, I can drop you off at the nearest fuel station. They might have a phone you can use." He seemed to think about it for a bit, then agreed. As we walked back to my van, he was walking very slowly, and he kept an eye on me the entire time. I felt a bit uncomfortable with the way he kept staring, but I thought maybe he was just being cautious. When we reached my van, we both climbed in. The rain was still pouring outside. I turned on the ignition and began driving, hoping to reach the gas station soon. It was a quiet night, and I wasn't sure where the closest fuel station was. I thought it might be around an hour away, but I was hoping for something closer. The first bit of our journey was pretty silent. I tried chatting with the guy, just simple stuff like the weather or asking about his day, but he didn't really say much. I guess that maybe he got a bump on his head from the accident or something, so I didn't push too hard. But the silence made me feel uncomfortable. A few times when I sneaked a peek at him, he was just gazing at me. Not happy, not angry, just staring. It was starting to freak me out. I began wondering if picking him up was a good idea. Normally, when someone helps you out, you'd be kind of grateful, right? Especially when you're stranded late at night in the rain. But this guy, he just seemed off. Luckily, after a bit, I saw some lights in the distance. I recognized it as a small town, and that meant a gas station wasn't too far off. But as we got nearer, the man's behavior became weirder. He kept turning his head, looking all around as if he was expecting someone. When I pulled into the gas station, I parked my van. I thought maybe he needed to use the restroom or grab a snack, so I asked if he needed anything else. But he didn't say a word. There was this weird vibe, like he was thinking hard about something. Then, out of nowhere, he suddenly lunged at me, pushing me hard against the van door. I was shocked. He started hitting me, and in the chaos, I tried to open the door to escape. And just as I was getting my bearings, the other door opened and someone yanked him away from me. Dazed and breathless, I stumbled out of the van. The sight that met me was something out of a movie. Two police cars, their lights flashing, and officers pinning the man to the ground. One of the cops came over to me. While they didn't tell me everything, they did mention that this man was on the run. He had done some pretty bad stuff and was using a stolen truck to get away. The police had been tracking him, and when they found the crashed truck, they figured he'd come to this gas station, so they waited. I guess they hadn't realized he was with me, but when they saw the struggle, they jumped into action. I couldn't help but shiver, thinking about what could have happened if the police weren't there. I knew the guy was a bit off, but I never imagined he could be dangerous. I was just trying to help, but it almost cost me. I felt so lucky that the police were there, and I made a promise to myself, always trust my gut feelings. The man's wet jacket made a slight dripping sound on the store's linoleum floor as he stepped inside. Just like before, he didn't acknowledge my presence or even glance in my direction. It was as if he was in a world of his own. Instead of being slightly funny this time, it was beginning to feel a bit eerie. "Hey, forgot something?" I asked, trying to keep the mood light. He didn't respond, and instead went straight to the chip aisle where he picked up a bag of potato chips. He then made his way to the counter, placing the bag down with a soggy bill. I could see rainwater dripping off the ends of his hair from under his hood. I wanted to make some small talk, maybe ask if he was okay or if he needed a ride somewhere. But something about his demeanor made me hesitate. I just took the bill, gave him his change, and watched as he went back out into the rain. Curiosity got the better of me, so I peeked out the window again to see where he was headed. Just like before, there was no vehicle waiting for him. He simply walked off, disappearing into the rainy night. The glow from the streetlights made the rain look like little silvery threads, and the man looked like a ghostly figure moving through them. I shook my head, puzzled. Maybe he's got someplace nearby and he's just walking, I told myself. But even that didn't make much sense given the weather. An older woman named Sarah used to come by the store quite often, and she would always share tales about the strange things that happen in our town. I started to wonder if this man was one of her stories come to life. As I continued with my tasks, I started feeling a slight chill. Maybe it was because of the dampness from the rain, or maybe it was the oddness of the man's visits, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I was in the middle of arranging candy bars on a shelf when I heard it again. That same tapping sound. I slowly turned my head towards the door, half expecting and half dreading to see the same man again. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, keeping my words simple. The man didn't answer me. "Phone? You need phone?" I tried again, thinking he might be lost or in trouble. He muttered, "Road, there," pointing vaguely. I looked outside and saw an empty gas can near one of the pumps. "Ah, you need gas?" I asked, pointing at the can. "Help," he said, nodding. His words were few, but I could tell he didn't know English well. I agreed to help and went outside with him. He handed me a card, and I began filling the can with gas. The whole time I could feel his eyes on my back, like he was watching closely. It felt weird. As I was almost done, he suddenly grabbed my arm. I was startled. He said some things fast, but I couldn't get it. I just wanted to get back inside. But then I heard a loud shout, and as I turned towards the store, I saw another man. He was quickly stuffing stuff into a big bag. He saw me looking and jumped towards me, but before I knew what was happening, everything just went dark. I woke up, my head throbbing. I was on the cold store floor. It seemed like it had just been a few moments since everything happened. And then it hit me. I'd been knocked out, probably by the first man. I called the police and they came quickly. They took me to see a doctor. I had a big bump on my head and needed some stitches, but I was okay. What really scared me was what the police said next. They'd looked at the video from the store and the man inside had a gun. It made me feel lucky. Sure, I felt dumb for getting tricked, but I was glad nothing worse happened. If I'd tried to do something or even looked like I was going to, he might have shot me. When my friend Jake went away on a trip, I had our shared apartment all to myself. It was the week when most students get a break from school because it's spring break. I was one of those students. So, there were no classes for me to attend, and nothing much planned. Monday was one of those days where you just want to stay indoors. Why? Because there was a massive storm outside. This wasn't something new. Around this time every year, we'd get a few of these big storms. Even though they happened often, every storm felt bigger and scarier than the last one. The tall trees outside looked like they were dancing wildly. Every once in a while I could hear the house make sounds because of the strong winds. It was as if the house was talking to me, telling me it was scared too. Sleeping? Nah, there was no way I could sleep with all that noise. So I decided to stay awake. What better way to pass the time than to play video games? I switched on my Xbox and began playing one of my favorite games. I got so engrossed in the game that time flew by. Before I knew it, it was already close to 11 at night. Suddenly the doorbell rang. Ding dong! Startled, I paused the game. I was confused. Who could it be at this hour? Especially with such bad weather outside. Walking slowly to the front door, I peered through the tiny hole that lets you see outside without opening the door, but I couldn't see anyone there. Curiously, I opened the door. The storm greeted me instantly with its fierce wind and pouring rain. I looked left and right, but no one was there. Maybe, I thought, the wind had played a trick on me and rang the bell. It sounds silly, but what else could have done it? Shaking my head, I closed the door and went back to my game. But just as I was about to continue, I heard a loud noise from the back of the apartment. It sounded like things were being thrown around. Oh no, the outdoor chairs, I thought. I rushed to the back door and saw our outdoor stuff being tossed around like toys. Chairs, tables, everything was flying about because of the strong winds. When I realized the mess the storm was making of our outdoor chairs and tables, I hurriedly threw on my old sneakers and rushed outside. The wind was so powerful, it felt like tiny needles were being thrown at my face each time the rain hit me. Racing against the wind, I tried to collect our outdoor items and prop them up against the house's wall. In the midst of all this chaos, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure. There was someone standing right at the far end of our yard, just looking at me. For a moment our eyes met. Unsure of who it was and with the rain pelting my face, I quickly picked up the last chair and raced back inside, leaving the mysterious person behind. Shutting the door behind me, I tried to catch a glimpse of them again. But just as mysteriously as they had appeared, they were now gone. Between the unexpected doorbell earlier and now this stranger in my yard, I was starting to feel uneasy. Rather than returning to my game, I just sat on the living room sofa and scrolled aimlessly on my phone. My eyelids grew heavy after a while, so I grabbed a cozy blanket from the nearby chair and curled up on the couch. Going upstairs seemed too much effort, and with the storm being louder up there, downstairs seemed cozier. Slowly, I fell asleep. A sudden gust of wind outside jolted me awake. My feet immediately felt cold. I realized they were wet. The floor around the couch had puddles, and in those puddles, I noticed muddy footprints. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Someone had been inside the house. Carefully, I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The muddy footprints were everywhere, leading from the back door, which, in my haste earlier, I'd forgotten to lock. Quietly, I followed the footprints. They weaved through the house, both up and downstairs. I grabbed my phone and locked the back door. My first instinct was to dial 911, but fear gripped me. What if the intruder was still here? Silently, I moved to a concealed spot and made the call. The police came, checked every nook and cranny, and confirmed that the intruder had left. They noticed, like I had, that nothing was stolen. The intruder had simply walked around, even past me while I slept. It was chilling to think they'd watched me sleep. The officers mentioned it could have been a targeted act, and maybe they were looking for my friend Jake instead of me. This thought scared me even more. If Jake had been home, what would have happened? Would things have been worse? I was left with more questions than answers.